So, hello, Olivier. I am happy to see you. And we are going to be starting. We're going to let everybody join in. I think we have, I love to see, it's very like triggering me each time when I see the numbers coming, you know, it's like, oh,
Okay,
and I see the names of people that I've connected with, spoke to recently. So it's always nice to see everybody
of,
joining.
of course, my pleasure to be with you.
Fantastic. Well, it's always good to speak with you. And you know, it's funny because I was listening to your podcast yesterday, and it's such a difference to listen to people that you know their voice, because I felt you were almost there with me, you know.
Oh,
So
cool.
it was, yeah, because we had familiar voices, you know, is really nice.
Yes, and when we speak in French, so my English is very different. It's a completely different experience.
I know, but I love your podcast. I think you have a very joyful voice, and it's a very interesting subject, so topic.
Thank you. Just a little caveat. Um, don't hesitate to tell me if there is too much sound around me because I'm not alone in the house and it might get loud. So if you need me to, I might move to a more quiet area.
Okay. Well, don't worry, but I'm sure people will put down notes if there's any comment. But I want
Okay.
to jump in because it's 1:34 and we have an hour together, and I have so many questions for you. Just because I think, you know, 2020 was a very intense year,
Yes.
and it has prompted so many transformation, and it has created so many really interesting how can I say, interesting developments and interesting transformations. And you're one of them. And I was
Yes.
very excited to be listening to your Luxury Weekly. So for those of us, for those who are on the call, so Olivier and I know each other for quite a few years because we work together. We worked together.
Totally.
Olivier was a candidate of mine. That's how we connected, and he worked at Goyard, where I placed him. And then we worked as a client. We
Yes.
a bit of a client, but we've stayed in touch since. And so I want you to maybe start with sharing a little bit of your background, because you went from Cartier to Goyard to Bastide. So telling us a little bit of how those transition went, because I think it's very interesting how you experience all these different.
Of course, my pleasure to do that. And yeah, thank you again for inviting me on your webinar. I'm very happy to share whatever experience I had, and hopefully it's going to be helpful for some of the people in the audience. So yes, it all started in 2003. That's when I moved right out of business school. I moved to New York to join Cartier. So in a nutshell, I spent 11 years at Cartier, always in retail or wholesale. And so within retail, I was in charge of franchise boutiques to begin with. Then I moved on to real estate, where that was super exciting because it was back in like 2007, so
Mhm.
pre-crisis. So at that time, Cartier had very aggressive plans to increase the footprint, open new stores, renovate existing ones. It was really like an aggressive and ambitious development plan for the distribution. And then, of course, the 2008 crisis came, all the capex were frozen, terrible time. So the scope completely reduced. And that's when we were asked, a lot of people in the corporate office were asked to multitask. And so that's when I transitioned to wholesale.
Mhm.
And I became director of one of their wholesale divisions. And it was interesting. I was actually responsible for the Florida market. So 1 week per month, I had to go down to Miami and like travel around in my car in Florida and be like a sales rep, going door to door to see all the wholesale accounts. And then I would fly back to New York to do my retail work in real estate. And I had some boutiques under management. So it was quite an interesting, sad and interesting time during which I learned a lot. And then a few years in wholesale, where it was all about increasing the productivity per door, managing a large network of wholesale doors, a large team of sales reps around the country. So super interesting. I think Cartier um, was the foundational years for me to learn networks, to learn retail and wholesale.
Mhm.
And then within those two gigantic distribution pillars, it's about the specificities of running a luxury store, but running franchises, negotiating a lease, finding the best location, overseeing construction of stores, basically you name it, everything that's related to retail or wholesale. And I think that's what paved the way to my move to Goyard. So that happened thanks to you. You were the catalyst for that. That happened in 2014. And so
I remember when you on your first day, you had to basically buy your desk, your own desk.
totally, yeah,
I,
totally.
I
It was
remember that.
incredible. So yeah, it was incredible because um, I was joining a very well-known and um, super exposed company that was, known as like probably the hottest brand in the industry. But for strategic reasons, they only had 2 points of sales in the US,
Mhm.
Bergdorf and Barney's, and they had 2 franchise stores. And so de facto, I was employee number one
Yeah.
in the Americas. And just like you said, on my first day, they gave me a laptop, a bank account, uh, an accounting firm, and a tax ID number, and nothing else. And we had the flagship store, which is now the flagship store and also the headquarters for the Americas, which was a brownstone, like a townhouse on 63rd and Madison, which was completely demolished because they had just acquired the building and completely demolished. So I was alone in this like ghost building. I had to buy my own desk, mount it myself, and just set up the internet connection and start from scratch. And we had a very, very ambitious timeline
Mhm.
because within the first 6 months, I had to open the store in Beverly Hills, the store in New York, which was the biggest store that they had at that time. A few months later, another store in Chicago. And so hire everyone, set up the entire logistics, all the operations, the supply chains, the administrative aspects and HR aspects of the company, set up a monogramming studio, like a workshop, establish the procedures and guidelines for the company. So it was a situation of sink or swim. So many things I had never done before. So I had to teach myself, I had to learn. The team in Paris was very helpful. And that's when I believe it was the first transformation for me in my career towards what I call intrapreneurship,
Yep.
being an entrepreneur within an existing company.
Yep.
So it's basically executing the vision of a founder, and the founder being the owner of Goyard and the CEO who all sit in Paris.
So Olivier, I want to go a bit fast forward because
Sure.
I want to go back to those transitions. I think I want people to have that understanding of the whole arch of your career. And just for those who are joining, the idea is to have a conversation with Olivier about how he went from really corporate to filiale or affiliate subsidiary in New York, and to start really startup mode. Just for people to know, after that, we'll go a little bit into the luxury trends because that's his amazing podcast. And then we will open it to questions for anybody who wants to ask questions. So we'll go, in 20 minutes, we'll open it to questions for those of you who have questions. And also, Olivier has been very generous, and he will, if you signed up for this webinar, which you must have if you're here, you will receive his list of top 10 resources. I don't know, 10 or 12 top resource of where he gets his information, which I think is a great gift for everybody because it's curated. I asked him to curate it with really only his favorite websites. So Goyard.
Yes, so Goyard, my first foray into entrepreneurship and just figuring things out on my own and building a subsidiary from scratch. And fast forward 3 years later, I was approached out of the blue by someone called Frédéric Fekai, who is a very known hairstylist, and he had his own line of hair care products, which he sold in 2008 to Procter & Gamble. And so he approached me to see if I would be interested to join him for his new startup company called Bastide.
Yeah.
So at that time, I was not really intrigued because I didn't want to leave Goyard. It was like this revenue was up and up. The growth was incredible. We were really like, I had just stabilized the subsidiary. But Frederic is a very convincing man. And a little side story, he's from Aix-en-Provence, just like me. And the brand is from Aix. And so I thought to myself, okay, what are the pros and cons? The One of the big things that attracted me was the fact that it was a startup.
Mm-hmm.
And as global president, it means that I would have to do things that I had never done before.
Yeah.
Then the side thing was the fact that it's, you know, my hometown where all my friends are and my family, and the headquarters was in New York. So it's like the marriage of my two, you know, favorite places on earth. And I thought, you know, this opportunity will only come once in my lifetime.
Yeah. Can I
So
ask you, because Bastide was really a startup. I mean, it was a brand that he created from scratch. I know he's very charismatic, but how
yes.
did he, what did he have? Was it the vision for what Bastide would be, or was it, that idea of being global and at the early stages that attracted you?
So Bastide was an opportunity because it's an old brand from X
Ah,
that Frederic bought and completely revamped it. And so when I joined, they had just closed the Series A, so the company was well capitalized. But I joined when they just started e-commerce. So literally the first month when I joined, we had maybe like whatever $2,000 of revenue. Like we started from zero, like literally zero. We had maybe like 1,000 followers on Instagram, no distribution except the website. And so, which is super scary to leave the millions of dollars that I was generating at Goyard to join a startup that no one has ever heard about, with like a team of like 5 people, 3 in X and like 2 in New York. But the reason why I made that choice, it's because the nature of the function was very different from what I had done before. For the first time, I was moving from a subsidiary to a headquarter. Regardless of the revenue, the nature of the job is what makes it interesting, because all of a sudden I had digital under my management,
yeah.
which unfortunately I had never really explored before. I had product development. I had full-on marketing functions,
Mhm.
communication, PR, social media, you name it. And basically, we had the full freedom to bring the brand wherever we wanted to bring it. We didn't have the weight or the burden of a very strong old heritage, like what I had always experienced at Goyard and Cartier. And so this blank canvas and the idea of like being fully part of building a brand from scratch was super interesting for me. And the idea of learning things that I had never done before, again, was super interesting.
Okay, so let's dive into this
Yeah.
because basically you are almost like attracted to newness and to being in that uncomfortable zone of learning, which is, needs a lot of courage. So how do you balance the risk and the reward? Because as you said, going into a brand where you didn't know a digital, where there was no followers and diving into a position where you had to learn and be humbled again, of being in these early steps or early stages of building something. How do you?
Yes. Yes. So you use the right word, which is risk assessment.
Mhm.
So it's about carefully assessing what you would gain and lose from making a decision. And then there is the gut instinct as well. At some point, you can rationalize a decision as much as you want. You will always find pros and cons. Then you just have to go for it and take the leap of faith and hope for the best. There was a big decisive factor for us, I include my family, is that over Christmas, we actually met Frederic and his wife and his children for coffee around Christmas time. We were all in X at the same time. And my wife told me, you have to work for this guy, because she really felt he was a very strong, charismatic, nice person. And so alignment, this is another important factor. It's alignment with your management or investors, the upper echelon. It's super important to work. That's the driver for me, is that I would work. I'm a very passionate person. I would work for people that, we always say, and Frederick always says, you want to have dinner with. It goes beyond just work. So at some point, it's about understanding why you make a decision, because you think you will learn and it's worth it.
So you touch upon, because I'm a big proponent of the value-based recruiting. So that's, when I started 15 years ago, you recruited just for the skills. Maybe 8 years ago, it was the skills and the looks, because, we were recruiting for brand ambassadors in the fashion industry. So it was very strong on that and the image. And what is shifting today is we're recruiting people because they're aligned in their values. So it's called the age of the believers. Is like, when you believe in something, you will be, much more pertinent, efficient, and passionate. And so you will feel committing to the brand versus just, coming to do a job. So yeah, you were a believer, and you joined.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Just on this point, I always refer to Cartier. Within their annual performance reviews. Cartier was the only brand at Richemont that had passion as one of the key criteria of evaluation of the performance of employees. And I think it speaks volumes to the power of a brand, and how, as leaders, as executives, it's absolutely our role to basically share that mission and make sure that everybody gets a dose, like, a fix, an injection of that passion, and that it comes almost naturally. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Yeah. No, it's very true. It's very true. And then, so I want to go, and before we open questions, because there are already questions going on, but before we go, how did you trigger the weekly luxury podcast? Because that's also, you're very passionate about luxury. You've been, in luxury since your beginnings. You've basically only been in luxury. And so how did that weekly podcast, how did you come up with the ideas? How did you create it? How did that happen?
So I think it's the same driver that I have in me, which made me confident enough to leave Goyard to join Bastide and put myself at risk and get out of my comfort zone. It had been like months and months that I had thought about doing a podcast, but without really knowing how and what it would look like. And so literally one day I bought a microphone on Amazon, and I started thinking about that I wanted to do something about the future of retail, because I'm passionate about technology and disruptive ways to basically make retail much more compelling into this new era that we live, especially post-COVID. And so the idea was to introduce the retail, everybody who listens to the podcast, to solutions to help them with their retail networks. And then one morning I told myself, you know what, that would be so cool if, instead of doing what probably everybody does, you open your news and you save articles thinking I'm going to read them later, and then we never get to it. Yeah, you see, guilty. Everybody does that. I have like hundreds of articles I told myself I would read, and I never read them. I thought it would be interesting for me. I would be the user of a quick 10-minute digest of the 10 most important news in luxury. And so I just did it. Literally, like within 3 days, I did it. Didn't think about it. I didn't overthink it. I just executed on it. And then I forced myself to just get into the rhythm and to never skip it. And so that it came as a personal challenge, and people like it. So
yeah. So for those of you who are joining, so Olivier has this luxury weekly podcast, and I have to tell you, it's amazing, because I'm the first one. I love information. I have my own favorite newsletters, but even some articles are more lengthy, and I don't go into it, and then things happen. And I have to say that your podcast, what made me like it is, like, it says it's 10 minutes, 10 trends. And I'm like, okay, that's 10 minutes of my time that it's contained, and in 10 minutes. And it's funny, because you see things that I might not have seen. I love that you give numbers. I love that you have more of a financial aspect sometimes. And then it's something completely, new. And I have to tell you, I emailed one of my old client, thanks to you, because on Monday I heard, oh, you know, that Vestiaire Collective had done this new partnership with Alexander McQueen. And so I had worked with Vestiaire Collective for a number of years. So I emailed the CEO saying, hey, congratulations. And it was like, thanks to you that, you know, it prompted me to reconnect with him. And I think that the 10-minute format is really excellent. So I want to go, you know, I think that what's interesting is you've done corporate, you've done headquarters. So you've done corporate in a filiale, in subsidiaries.
I've done 2 subsidiaries, yes.
2 subsidiaries, French brand, basically Bastide, also French brand, but based in New York. Yeah. If I could tell you what would be, you know, your preferred, is it because you're changing purpose that you're going back to more of a core or being at the core with founders? Is that what is appealing to you, or being very at the origin of a project? What is the?
It's a very good question. I think, you know, when we start in our career, we might have an idea of the industry or the vertical we want to operate in, and the choice de facto by default is very often, if you can join like a big organization, a big name, from the LVMH, Kering, Richemont to L'Oréal, Estée Lauder. These are amazing companies to learn the foundations of a specific vertical. And it's difficult to actually start questioning our choices as we go through our career. And for me, it took a lot of introspection about, okay, what made me the happiest? What do I like to do? And there's always, we all do things that we hate. That's just the nature of work, you know, it's work. And things that we really love doing. So it's a balance, you know, no job is perfect. And so for me, I really realized that what drives me is the idea of building, okay? And so it's smaller, it's like earlier stage companies where we can really stir the ship and stir the brand in any way we want. And it's about creating that magic, that connection with the customers. It's about building the brand equity. It's about developing the distribution networks through different channels. It's about expanding internationally. Like all this building is really exciting for me, as opposed to managing a very large, complex, you know, entity and deliver that whatever growth percentage point is required every year, and then managing people, you know. So
can I also answer, because I think what is interesting also is that in the, how many years, 15, 20 years that you've been in the luxury industry, things have changed.
17, yes.
17. So what was maybe 10, 15 years ago, I mean, building a brand today is, I don't say more easy, but is a possibility because of Instagram, because of direct to consumer, which didn't exist 15 years ago.
Totally.
So how does the trend, like what is luxury was for you 15 years ago and what is it for you today?
Yes, so a very good point. I always say it has never been easier to launch a brand. It has never been more difficult to scale and to make it relevant and meet success. When I started, it was retail and wholesale. Smartphones didn't exist. Facebook didn't exist. So it was a very different ways of connecting with customers. But the interesting thing is that when we talk about the metrics, about the CAC and your LTV and all these metrics, which really came to light with the advent of DNVBs, those same metrics have always applied to the retail networks in terms of your rent, your traffic, your retention, your repeat purchases. And so it's always been very, very business oriented. But starting from retail and wholesale, the world kept growing into complexity. And so now it's when we talk about the trend of omnichannel, for example, which is one of the big trends and everybody's going after omnichannel. What does it mean? A lot of executives think that it means, okay, someone who buys something online, they want to be able to return it in the store. That's that's one very minute, small detail of what omnichannel is. What it really means is that today the clientele is the majority of the clients are millennials or Gen Z.
Mhm.
Okay, especially Gen Z will represent 8% of the luxury clients by 2025, and millennials the larger portion of luxury clients. Being digitally native, it's not about, okay, I'm going to buy my jewelry at Cartier in the store and I'm going to buy my grocery on Amazon or Whole Food online. It doesn't matter. Those networks are all intertwined. It's all the same. It's all about serving the client wherever that client is and whatever that client wants. And so it's a very fundamental shift in mindset for brands to understand that they have to chase and meet that client to make the experience compelling, convenient, and magical. Those touch points, whether they are online or offline, have to carry the exact same level of gratification and amazing experience. Like Estee Lauder, for example, allows people to order samples using Spotify. You
Wow,
know,
I didn't
uh,
know.
yeah, so Spotify is a channel. TikTok, of course. I mean, I'm not going to talk about TikTok. Clubhouse is coming, and it's just a matter of time. Giuseppe Zanotti is on Clubhouse. It's just a matter of time. It's again, you're meeting clients wherever they are, and all of them are on the phone. So just get down to those apps. The brands are infiltrating these apps, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
But it
you know,
requires a separate mindset.
yeah, I think it's very true what you said, because I mean, 10 years ago, brands were telling you what to do, what to buy, how you think. And now it's shifted that it's a conversation between clients and brands have to reach out and be able to converse at wherever, on whichever channel they are, and the channels are expanding. Um,
Totally.
I want to make sure that we have time, and because there's already questions popping in. So I want maybe one last question before we open it to
Sure.
questions from the audience. You have had major career changes in those 15 years, 17 years. What would be, some learnings or some advice that you could share? Because I think you have a very you feel very serene about your choices that have not been easy choices at times, and how what kind of advice or learnings that you have learned that you could share today?
Sure, sure, sure. Um, so I think um, both type of companies, whether we talk about the very large established corporations or we talk about startups, those two profiles have their pros and cons. There are good things about large corporations and bad things, and vice versa for startups. Um, so I'm not trying to draw a picture which is, oh my God, I'm so much happier in the startup world or like with smaller brands, because that's really not my intention here. The biggest learning is really to be true to yourself and authentic, to really understand what your motivations are, your ambition, and what your drivers are. I've always operated from a place of I need to be happy to go to work in the morning. It sounds very trivial, but it's a much harder thing to tell yourself every day, and to do I call that internal weather assessment
Mhm.
of how you feel. Um, and and so that's the only thing I could recommend, is to know that there are so many alternatives, so many opportunities out there, and that there is it's about finding what drives you, what making sure that you work in an environment that fits your values, who you are, and what will be the best use of your talents and skills.
Well, thank you, because that's a great plug-in for my method, because that's what
You see.
I know, but it's true. I tell people, at the end of the day, you have to know your skills, you have to know your soft skills, you have to know your personality, and you have to know your purpose. The more you know about yourself, what works for you, the more not only happy, but I think efficient, and the more at ease you will be with the places, because you will be the one choosing versus being plucked and going to places.
Absolutely.
So yeah, yeah. Olivier promised that he was going to do a clarity card for me. So,
Okay, I promise you. Yes.
so I want to open to questions, and I'm going to say something quite funny, but I've been doing some webinars all of 2020 and 20, and this is the first time that I see my dad's name signed up.
No way.
Ciao, Papa.
Bonjour, monsieur.
Yeah, and so that's a fun thing. So the first question I have
Yes.
is from Rasha. And she said, Rasha Lamar, who is a fantastic woman and alumni of the method, how did you lead when you didn't know the exact job function? Because at one point you said, you arrived at Bastide without knowing the digital. So she said, how did you lead when you didn't know the exact job function? And how did you learn, and how did you work with your subordinates?
Yeah, so a very good question. So I was lucky enough that when I joined Bastide, there was a CMO in place, and she's an absolute superstar. And so she had digital under her management.
Mm-hmm.
And so she taught me a lot. She taught me a lot. So much so that towards, there was a point where we kind of shifted our digital strategy, and she was super busy working on the launch and the revamp of another segment of our portfolio. And so I was able to totally manage my e-com manager to basically implement this new strategy. So it's about, to answer your question, it's about having the right talent around you, um, and self-learning. It's the big trend in upskilling. Now
Mm-hmm.
there are so many ways to basically teach yourself. There are like General Assembly is a way. Coursera is another platform where you can literally graduate and learn so many different things. And digital, it's really something that fascinated me because I knew it was big. And so now, we can get into that later, but now it is so prominent for brands to capture and understand what the power of digital, and it means so many different things, but not only like running e-com. So I was very happy to teach myself and read tons of things and have my team educate me. In terms of, just to very quickly finish, it's a very good point. It's a very good question, because every, uh, all my years before that, every time I had teams under my management and it kept growing in complexity and scope, I was leading them on functions that I had myself performed at some point.
Yep.
I worked in stores. I worked as a sales rep. I had stores under my management. I did it all on my own, like, getting my hands dirty. So it was easy and natural for me to lead people in performing these functions. Bastille was the first time that I had never done anything like that. So it was about knowing, having the humility of knowing that I don't know, trusting my team, and just filling the knowledge gap as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And so that's how you gain respect, is the follow-up question, is because you were learning at the same time that you made yourself, that you were leading them, but also learning while you led them.
Yes, and the same can be said of in finance. I was kind of the acting CFO. We didn't have a CFO. We had two accounting firms and external account. Like, if you think about your CPA that does your tax return, that was our CFO. So I had to like massively upskill in finance, especially if we were a startup that had investors. So I had responsibility to the board, and I had to run quarterly board meetings and publish consolidated financials every quarter. So same thing, I had to learn that language and that type of work very quickly.
So that's a good segue for the next question, because it's a question from Veronique Gabay, who is, I'm sure you know,
Yes, of course.
a dear client friend, woman, fantastic woman, who has this beautiful perfume line. If people should go and check it out. So a question of time in your life. We want different things at different times. we are good at different things at different times. Do you think we got way better at something going through a startup?
So, okay, it's a very interesting point. I'm just going to phrase it differently. For me, the startup being at the end of my career uh, just allowed me to close the loop and to complete the circle. I could have done the startup earlier and then go through the corporation, and it would have been the same conclusion. Um, so basically, if you look at the 3 stages of my career, I have worked for very large brands within very large corporation, like groups. Then I worked for completely family-owned business, international business. And then I worked in that startup, high growth, private equity backed type of company. And because I've seen it all, I know exactly what I like.
Well,
And
I mean, so you're like a bit of a couteau suisse, a Swiss Army knife, in the sense that
yes,
but I think because adaptability is key today, being adaptable and being flexible and adapting is one of the best qualities one can have because the world is changing so much.
absolutely. That's one of the quotes or like the advice from the CEO of Goyard, who I hold very dearly. It's he always told me it doesn't matter. We will never really know if we're right or wrong, and it doesn't really matter. The most important thing is to move on. Like we have to move forward. Otherwise we just analysis paralysis. Like we cannot move on. So being in movement, always learning and kind of challenging myself and getting out of my comfort zone have been always like staples in the way I led my career.
Okay, so we're going to move with more questions because,
Yeah.
and I'm going to pop one quickly to the top because it's somebody you've worked and I've worked with her. It's a question by Sarah Natowingo.
Cool.
Based on your amazing experience, how would you build your own consulting firm?
Oh my God. So it's a difficult question because, okay, so I've, for the past few months, I have been extremely involved with the startup world. I mentor startups. I mentor and advise a lot of founders, and I'm also very involved on the VC world on the investor side. And one thing that I discovered that's absolutely true from like most people is that everybody has an imposter syndrome. Like a lot of people have an imposter syndrome, and a lot of people are insecure. Okay. So if you take these 2 elements into consideration, it is hard to assess, okay, what are my superpowers? What's my magic? What's my talent? And that's what needs to be established in order to establish a consulting firm and to say, okay, I'm going to start making people pay me a lot of money for me to do that. So I haven't really done that exercise yet.
With the method, that's because
Okay.
it's really, Olivier, it's the imposter syndrome is very much our own mind who tells us a story. But with all that you have had, you have extreme qualities that the worlds can be shared.
Thank you. It's like I'm having a therapy session in public.
Okay, so let's move with Nicolas' question. Nicolas says, earlier you mentioned new hiring practice focusing on culture and purpose. Could you elaborate on this point, especially in the context of luxury and how it's changed?
Yes. So I think Sarah and may probably remembers that at Goyard, I used to ask a lot of very strange, unusual questions to gauge the interest of the candidate towards the luxury industry in general. And so I felt at companies like Cartier and Goyard, in order to be an ambassador of these brands, you have to be fully committed and engaged with the mission, the vision of the company, and and so people have to be passionate when it comes to that. In the startup world, it's a little bit different because, again, when I say startup, I'm really talking about like smaller structures and early stage companies. Um, we don't have the luxury to hire uh, large teams. So every single hire has to bring an immediate ROI and make an immediate impact. Um, so at that time, I think, of course, values and culture are super important, but usually now it's more on the candidate side. The candidates will be the ones who will want to align, to find a company with great values, great culture to be aligned with. Um, and from a hiring manager point of view, um, the number one criteria for me is really the talent that this person would bring, whether that person can show actionable, immediate like proofs of deliverables of what she or he has performed in the past for other companies with similar
Achievements.
sizes, yeah, achievements. Um, and then, of course, as I said earlier, um, you want to work with people that you align with, that you want to go have dinner with, because at the end of the day, we spend more time at work. And now, of course, with COVID, it's very different, but we see our colleagues more than we see our family. Um, and the new generation, that was a big learning for me. Um, the new generation is very different. When I started at 24 in New York, I had to pay my dues and kind of like shut up and do whatever I was told to do. The new generation is not like that at all, and I think it's fantastic. And so I had to change as a manager because I couldn't replicate what was done to me or the way
Mhm.
I was managed as a more junior employee. And so I realized that I didn't know anymore how to manage a younger generation who was extremely savvy. Like at 25 years old, they know so much more than me when I was 25 years old. They're so much more confident and they have different expectations, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think leadership. A big part of leadership for me is the humility of unlearning what we were uh, taught or what we learned, and to make space for new ways of leading or new ways of sharing and new ways of learning. So yeah. Um,
Absolutely.
so thank you for that one. Jonathan says, did competitors influence your strategic approach for building the Bastide brand? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. 100%. So first of all, when I talk about what I learned that I had never done before, you can one big piece it's branding and strategy. Because when you work in a subsidiary for a big brand like Cartier, Goyard, and you can name like 100 brands, in a subsidiary, there you have very, very little input in the creativity, the strategy, and the positioning of the company. In the startup world, it's a very different thing because um, so first of all, we had to build the brand architecture. In your
Mhm.
brand architecture, you have your positioning. Positioning, it's not only your price, but it's basically just to summarize it. You have to think about the market that you play in, and of course, our market was beauty and different categories. It's not a new market. So technically, you are going into a saturated market with existing competitors, like incumbents who have a certain share of that market. As a newcomer on the market, two things are going to happen. Clients are going to trade up for your brand, so therefore they will pay more to get something that has a higher perceived quality or benefit, or they will trade down to your brand, meaning they will switch from a more expensive brand and they will decide to pay a little bit less to get your brand because they feel that the benefits or the quality is of equal value to that brand that they were paying more money to. So in terms of the branding aspect and the strategy, it's extremely important to clearly identify who are your competitors because you are going to take away market shares from them. And if you fail that exercise or if it's not performed correctly, then your brand is not going to be successful. So of course, yes, we were constantly monitoring our competition. but not only from that very high level strategy, like brand equity building point of view, but also from a more go-to-market point of view, to see all the campaigns they were doing, how they were interacting on social media, because there's nothing wrong with understanding, learning from others, I want to say.
Thank you. And I was reading because there's comments coming on, and people say very true and very impressed, amazing person. So I wanted to read those. I think it's Roberto Monte said, "I agree. The perfect becomes the enemy of the good. We can't be afraid of to reinvent ourselves." Thank you.
Yes, 100%.
So, so my dad asked a question.
Wow.
Said, "Congrats to Olivier for his brilliant achievements. Quick question. Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder, recently advised youngsters with entrepreneurial career in mind to get themselves a mentor. Have you ever had such a mentor?"
Fantastic question. And I've always had a mentor. My first boss at Cartier, with who I have stayed in touch and who became a very dear friend. And we speak almost like every week or every 2 weeks. And that's a very good point. To align yourself with a more like a senior person who can help you and guide you throughout your career. Yeah.
Okay, that's
very important.
And my question to follow that: do you have mentees?
I want to say that I do, without the official title of being thinking of myself as a mentor, but I know that some team members, some people with who I worked with or who worked for me throughout my career are still calling me or reaching out to me with questions today. So I guess that's a form of being a mentor.
Exactly. And I have a question from John Santos. It's amazing because these webinars are such a great way to reconnect with people, because it's people some I know, some I have talked to recently, some I haven't spoken in some time. So it's great. So thank you for joining. So John says, "Great to hear your background and journey jump into things you have not done before. Part of taking big risk sometimes mean failing big too. Can you share a failure that can be a learning moment for us?"
Yeah, totally. Earlier on, I spoke about how I took on a part of the digital strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this big idea of completely revamping our digital, our e-com to, I even called it digitally born again, as opposed to digitally native. And so we went into what we call hyper segmentation of our e-commerce. And so we switched to a new agency, and we like double or tripled our ad spend budget per month. My team worked a lot on it, and it didn't deliver the results that we expected. And so we spent like 2-3 months preparing it. I sent my whole team like working like crazy. Everybody was spinning their wheels, and it was very disappointing. So so that was quite a disappointment, quite a failure. And I think that number one, maybe we relied too much on an agency that was helping us. And none of us internally really had experience, like first-hand experience doing that. So we relied a little bit too much on a certain agency. And also, I think we just took on too much work. That's another thing about the startup world, is that prioritize. I always say, when you are everywhere, you are nowhere. And so it's about making sure that your teams are working on things that really matter. And the failure is good. It's part of the process. The number one rule of startups is test and learn, iterate, A/B testing, until you find your product market fit, until you find your cruising speed.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very important. I think you know, being able to speak about failure was very much part of the startup world, right? You had to fail, and that was a learning and everything. And I'm hoping it's coming to the corporate world, which usually, you know, has this perfect image that you are, everything works perfectly. But being able to accept failure, being able to learn from failure, even in corporate organization, is how, you know, there will be more space for entrepreneurs. That's where more ideas will be welcome, because you can do things, you know, test things a little bit more. And usually luxury brands have been very formal about not, you know, testing new things and failing, but I'm hoping it's coming into the corporate world a bit more.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's also the nature of those corporations and the way they are organized. There's decisions are much more centralized. So usually the decision process is longer, and you need more approval, and it needs to be. They need to ask themselves, if we implement this new tool, this new strategy, it has to be replicated around. Can it be replicated around the world in every market? So I completely understand that it's a very different profile of companies. Whereas for us, being small, central, and literally like in an open space altogether, we talk quickly, we make decisions quickly, we try, and when we fail, we fail. And when we succeed, then it's all together.
So that's a quick question, because we have more questions coming in, but that will be interesting on how startups work now, because you're not in the same office, you know, in that open shared where, you know, ideas were bouncing off of each other. Would love to hear how you think the startup world, how startups are doing today when they're not, you know, all in the same one room thinking ideas.
Yeah, so I know that there's a lot of different opinions on the subject, from Netflix or Tiffany and all these different guys. They think that people should be at the office. Um, Everything has pros and cons. I am a big believer in remote work, because I think COVID made everyone realize that, hey, you know what? We have family, we have kids. There are other aspects of our lives that create obligations. And if it's not children or anything of that sort, it's other things that we have to worry about and that we have to deal with. And so I thought it was fantastic to all of a sudden bring that level of humanity into the conversation around work. I think you can achieve the same amount of performance and collaboration being remote. I think that the fantasy of open space is largely exaggerated, because it's nice to all be together, but it's highly, highly, highly disruptive, because the number one disruptor is, can I ask you a quick question? Literally, I would hear that question like literally like 15 times a day. And that quick question always is much more than a quick question, and it leads to conversations, and it's highly disruptive.
You're right. Oh my God, I
Yeah.
forgot about that one. Can I agree? Oh, you're just there, you know, yeah.
Yes.
So we have Lucy Price who's saying, what's the best way for a luxury startup to get a following with a super tight marketing budget? And when you are a newcomer to this market segment, what's the best
Yeah.
way to spend the money you have to market?
All right. So I'm going to try to be concise, but uh, so the reality of the market is that everybody knows the CPM and the CAC have increased so much over the past few months. You have a multiplication of channels, okay? And so if you have a very like shoestring type of marketing budget, how do you make a dent when you cannot buy your growth on Facebook or Instagram ads, and you are basically trying to compete for followers in very saturated channels? So one advice that what I've been told, okay, I didn't make that up. It came from like some of the growth agencies or growth hackers that I'm talking to, is to, number one, try to go to channels that have lower CPMs. So Snapchat, Reddit, all that type of networks where the cost is lower. If you want to do any type of paid activity. Then in terms of organic, SEO, even though it's a longer tail, but SEO in order to be is extremely powerful, extremely effective, but it's longer tail usually, but it's definitely worth it. I have talked to countless companies that had to cut completely their marketing budgets, their advertising budgets during the pandemic, and they had to recoup that traffic um, through SEO. Then just to go back to the question, because you said early, I think the question was about early stage luxury company.
Yep. A luxury startup to get a following with a super tight marketing budget.
Yeah.
And a newcomer in the market segment.
So then that it goes back to your brand equity building exercise to understand exactly what your point of differentiation is, who are going to be your competitors. I'm super curious why you are luxury, what makes the company's luxury. If it's driven by price, is price driven by quality of materials, craftsmanship, scarcity of supply, like, you know, what are the drivers for luxury? Because there's nothing worse than being luxury for being expensive, or calling yourself luxury because you're expensive. And then it goes into basically the articulation of your brand, the tone of voice, the content and the copy, and the imagery around the voice. How do you have to perfectly articulate that point of differentiation and find we always say fan first. So basically acquire your first 100 customers and then capitalize on them like crazy. The number one metric that investors are looking at is not necessarily your CAC, because they know it's a very different landscape right now. It's the retention, it's the repeat purchase. That's super important. And there is a curve, there's a very specific curve that's you look at where your cost of the retention has to basically uh, go a certain way to show that basically your clients are coming back. And so to your earlier point, Agathe, it's about conversation, engaging in conversation with those first 100 customers, first, whatever, 500 or 50 even customers, engage into conversations to validate your product market fit, your pricing, the quality of your products, and make sure that these people will become the advocates and will bring you the next, 500 or 1,000 clients.
Yeah, thank you. Very interesting, Olivier. And so last question, because it's 2:30 and I know people have to go, but I think we could speak for hours, but well, maybe we'll do a double. But Tia Caldini, hi Tia, ask at what point did you engage a board in the startup phase?
So the board was already there when I joined Bastide. So we already had a board.
Yeah, because Bastide was a startup from somebody who had been a real entrepreneur and had already, so it's not a startup from, early founders who just.
Yes. So to answer the question more broadly, yeah, because Bastide is not, it's a very unusual example. So first of all, if you don't have a board when you start, it means you don't have necessarily investors. If you don't have investors, it means that you bootstrapped your company on your budget. Therefore, the best option at that time is to have advisory board, is to set up like an advisory board where you give like a fraction of equity to experts who will really help you. And that's what I'm doing actually. Like I'm advising a few companies because the best is to have usually someone with like a deep industry or product expertise, and then someone else would be someone with like a very strong network. If it could be the same person, but.
Yeah, very, thank you. And choosing and compensating your influencers.
So the influence.
And I think it was the last question, but it's the last, and then we'll.
No, that's a good question. So it all depends at what stage of your company you're at. The influencer economy has been shaken up so much since the pandemic, and I think it's making a lot of brands rethink the way they are allocating their dollars. The power of influence is still there, but I think now a lot of brands are actually looking for different types of influencers, or like more creative ways to approach influencers, especially because we're entering the era of creators and brands have to curate. And so brands could totally align with like not less traditional influencers, but more people who align with the values and will tap into a sub community which will be highly engaged. People like doctors, uh, people like chef, you know, nurses. I mean, you name it. It's like not your traditional influencer in the traditional sense of the term, but these people have the same like high engagement, high followers, and it creates good ways to basically show a different dimension of the brand.
Mhm.
If you're in an early stage startup, don't pay your influencers. It's all about creating that. Again, like I'm repeating things that, you know, advice from growth, I like, you know, experts in the industry. Don't pay your influencers. Um, Build very strong and long-term relationships with influencers. Ask them tons of questions. Ask them tons of feedback on the experience that your brand is providing them, from the packaging to the unboxing to the product, the delivery, the restitution, like you name it. And that will allow you to iterate on your own brand and form these relationships that you will capitalize on later on.
Very good. Olivier, first, I want to thank you. I want to tell everybody who's still on, thank you very much for spending the time with us. And Olivier, you will receive an email. I think there will be the replay of this
Cool.
video if you want to share, but also you will receive an email. In the email, there is Olivier's top 10 newsletters and source of information. So that's, thank you very much for that, Olivier. And
My pleasure.
thank you for, you know, I thought for me it was real talk. I mean, there's so many conferences and so many webinar, and this was real, you know, information. This was real about you, about your background, successes and failures. It felt very personal. So thank you.
No, my
And
pleasure,
by
of
the
course.
way, I received already a text that I want to meet him. Is he still, you know, does he have time for working for me? So did you see? There we go.
Amazing.
And thank you.
It's very easy to find me on LinkedIn.
I know. So yes, you'll have, we'll add Olivier's LinkedIn also in the message. So you'll have it. And we have just a bunch of thank you. His LinkedIn is on the email. Thank you. And Sarah said that you and I are her mentors.
Yes, I saw that. Thank you so much, Sarah.
And she says, then can we do this again? So yes, we'll definitely do this. And
We should
thank
do
you.
a clubhouse.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
That's Clubhouse. Okay, well, you'll see Olivier and I on Clubhouse
Yes.
soon in March, right? Shall we do that? Early March, we'll
Yeah,
do
for
Clubhouse
sure.
on startup, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you more about this. So keep
Cool.
us posted. Sign in the newsletter of Sur Mesure if you haven't done so. But thank you, and everybody very much enjoyed. Hi Mishka, and so I'm seeing some familiar names.
Yeah, no,
And
that's so nice. Thank you so much thank you for organizing it. Fantastic time. Very great questions from you and the audience. And it's always a pleasure to be able to talk about that type of experience.
merci Olivier.
Thank
Merci.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.